I'm delighted to be joined by my friend Konstantin back on the channel, and he needs no introduction. I think everybody knows Konstantin and his fantastic work to try and uncover Russian propaganda narratives, to try and really explain the lies behind Russian imperialism. And I think if you're not watching his channel, then really you are missing out. It is essential to understand what's going on. We are, as we used to do, going to talk about the economy and what's happening in the Russian economy. There are further signs of deterioration, further signs of it crumbling, but we are going to start talking about the extraordinary events in Kyiv, which is the protests in wartime. Before we do, please do make sure you support, if you can, our channels by liking, subscribing, sharing the videos, etc. If you can, then buy me a coffee, Patreon, all this kind of stuff. It helps Konstantin produce his content. It helps me to carry on growing and scaling the channel. And of course, coming and doing events, which I am doing at the moment from beautiful, sunny Odessa. And even though it's lovely and pleasant, I'm here to work and record impactful videos to help towards Ukrainian victory. So thank you to everyone who's contributed to help make that possible. Konstantin, welcome.
Jonathan, good to see you as usual. Fantastic to be here. Thank you so much for inviting.
It's always a pleasure, always a pleasure. And I know I felt a little bit guilty talking about Odessa because I know you'd love to be here. You know the city well, and you have a degree of fondness for it. But Ukraine will be victorious, and everyone who's helped in that victory, I think, will be welcome here. At least that's my optimistic view of the future.
All I can be is optimistic, you know. That's all I have left.
You have to, you have to laugh sometimes, and you have to be optimistic. And one of the extraordinary things that's happened this week, which actually it's not just Russian propagandists that are really struggling to understand this. Actually, it's also a lot of pro-Ukraine Westerners find it a little bit bemusing, and that is the so-called cardboard revolution. It is people have come out on the street to protest. Not against the war being fought. No, that's a propaganda narrative. They've not come out to demand that Zelensky resigns. That's also a propaganda narrative. No, they've come out to demand that their government respects individual choice, transparency, respects the move for less corruption and for improvements in governance. And they really come out, I think, to remind the government that they represent the people, that the government exists for the people. And I think this is just a little friendly nudge to make sure the government does not forget that, because some of their actions indicated that they were taking the people for granted. But I think the propagandists in the Kremlin are really having trouble understanding how they actually spin this story to their advantage.
Uh, a lot of people ask the question, why did Putin start the war? What does he have against Ukraine, Ukrainian people? Well, I think this is the answer. This is what he has against Ukrainian people. And we're seeing it right now in Kyiv. Well, we saw it recently. People just go to the streets, protest, and you know what? They get results. There were two Maidans in Ukraine, and each one of them, got results. People spoke, and their will prevailed. And that's one thing that Putin is very afraid of. He doesn't like Russians to come onto streets because they might get results too. And that's it's just not in the picture of the world of Vladimir Putin, okay? And Ukrainians are free, and that's what he doesn't like about them. He wants to control Ukraine, not necessarily to annex all Ukrainian land and make it one big Russia, but he wants political control over the country, and he wants to eliminate this very idea of people being able to get onto the streets and protest and make themselves heard and not get arrested for that and not get beaten. And this is just this is what Russians don't have. Okay,
So this is another, this isn't then something they can use propagandistically. This is something they're going to want to really hide from their internal audience,
Yes,
I guess.
exactly. They are in a very tight spot in the Russian propaganda because, they are trying to show, look, Ukrainian people are standing up against Zelensky. Zelensky, and Zelensky is the heathen figure in Russian propaganda. He's the root of all evil of Ukraine. It's Zelensky's fault that Russia attacked Ukraine and all these Ukrainians are dying. That's, of course, it's Zelensky's fault and his government, marionette, puppet government. But at the same time, they started showing these pictures of protests in Kyiv, but at the same time, they were shut down because wait a second, people in Ukraine go to protest, and it is shown on national TV and different Telegram channel, and that's the official information coming from Russian state, right? So it's got to be true, and they're protesting against Zelensky for one simple reason: they don't like what Zelensky is doing, and they are free to show it, and they feel they have a right to actually, to write things that they think they're wrong. And how does that compares to what's going on in Russia, where even thinking of taking protests to a street soon will become a crime? Not just actually doing it, but thinking about it, intending to do it. And, it's just so they're in a very tight spot. They want to show how Ukrainians protest, but they can't because that'll give Russians plenty of food for thought, and Russians would start asking questions. The thing is, they have showed enough. That's one thing I don't understand is they have showed enough already. People have seen it in Russia. And as I said, it came from the state. So it's official. It's not spreading fakes or anything like that. And yet, for some odd reason, Russian people don't connect the dots. They don't start asking questions. Why Ukrainians can protest and we can't, so, but yeah,
And then
it's
the
a
other
very
question is
odd situation. Yeah.
and then the question is what they're protesting about. That is even more difficult to handle because some of the propagandists started by saying, oh, look, they're protesting because they don't like the war and they think the war is all to do with Zelensky. But of course, that's not true, and that's very easy to disprove. Now, what they're actually protesting about is that the government shouldn't be allowed to steal things, and the government shouldn't be controlling the organizations that investigate them for stealing things. And they're winning that fight. They're winning the fight where officials get investigated and some of them get jailed, very senior officials. And what triggered this scandal, supposedly, is these transparency and corruption investigators got very close to people in the inner circle of government. Now, if the protesters win, that's an extraordinary, dangerous message for the Kremlin. One, you can't steal everything. Two, you won't get away with it. I mean, that's terrifying for the Kremlin, and not
The
just
bit,
Putin, but the whole vertical of power around him.
yeah, yes, the whole regime, and biggest threat is, look, in Ukraine they don't like the president, they don't like Zelensky, they don't like his actions, and they actually go to the streets and protest. And Russian propaganda says, well, you know what, that's okay. Well, wait a second, it's good for the goose, it's good for the gander, right? No, it doesn't work like that. In Russia, we have different laws. In Russia, we have foreign agents and all of that. That's them, Westerners, murking our waters and things like that. But that's just this situation is satirical, really.
It's amazing why, yeah, yeah. I mean, this has really put them in a spot. And actually, there are many pro-Ukraine Westerners who are really struggling to understand what's going on. And there are some subtleties which almost none of the media have reported on or understood, but these are signals that every Ukrainian understands. So, for instance, when you look at the pictures of the crowds, not a single person came out with the Ukrainian flag. Now, no one in the Western media has talked about this, but no one in the crowd has a Ukrainian flag, which is extraordinary. And why is that? It's because they're not coming out to say the government is illegitimate. They're not coming out to say that we, the people of the country, and the government isn't. They're coming out to protest specific rights, specific aspects of rule of law, and they're coming out to specifically say that we're not saying the government is illegitimate. We're not a populist movement that is using nationalism and the flag. We're conveying a much more subtle, a much more sort of democratic, responsible, and mature signal here to protest peacefully and forcefully and not use populist sort of slogans and identity. That, as I say, that hasn't been picked up in any of the Western media, but every single Ukrainian immediately spotted that and understood exactly what message was being conveyed. So it's extraordinarily powerful, and it's a form of democracy in action, which I think is in some ways more mature than many Western democracies in their current state at the moment. It's quite extraordinary.
Brilliantly said. That's all I can say.
Yeah. Let's turn to the economy, because I find it fascinating. And we talk about the economy collapsing. And of course, the title of this video, as usual, is about, we're getting closer to that crunch point. But there's some interesting sort of subtleties behind that. I've just noticed that the interest rate, the base rate that we've talked about a lot, which is strangling business because they really wanted to try and get control of inflation, and almost the entire economy's and its sort of ability to generate investment and business has been reduced or almost eliminated by these high interest rates and high inflation rates. It looks like they are starting to cut the base rate. That doesn't mean inflation's coming down. It's still absolutely galloping faster than ever. So what's going on here? Are they giving up the fight to try to suppress inflation? And what's going to be the consequence of it?
I'll just give you a little history. Russian central bank, right from the start of the invasion, from February 2022, has been trying to keep the inflation under control. And I think, well, I can't prove it, but I think that was one of the orders that Vladimir Putin gave to Elvira Nabiullina, the head of the central bank. And she was doing decent job doing that. She had a few tools at her disposal, and she was using the key interest rate heavily. So the key interest rate is used by the central banks all over the world to control inflation, to control money mass in the economy, and then therefore, inflation is controlled. Well, Elvira Nabiullina raised the key interest rate because inflation was going up in Russia. She raised it until 21%, which is incredibly high for any economy. In Russia, made it to the top 5 economies with the highest key interest rates. And then in November, a war broke out between two powerful clans inside Russian government. The first clan is the economic clan, and Elvira Nabiullina is there. She's one of the leaders. Well, some say it's the central bank is the entire clan, and then there's another clan, is another power group, is Sergei Chemezov and his Rostech.
Grotesque. Yeah.
Yes, it's Russia's military-industrial complex. Rostech owns about 80% of all military enterprises in Russia. And in October, the war broke out. Elvira Nabiullina raised the key interest rate, and she said that the situation was very alarming. The inflation was growing, and the central bank was going to raise the interest rate even more. And then the attack from Chemezov followed. He started going publicly speaking against high key interest rate and against Elvira Nabiullina. And I covered that story quite a bit. And basically, we saw the war. when Sir Winston Churchill said that Russian politics is it's like bulldogs fighting underneath the carpet, you know. So we definitely saw the fight. It's been going on since October, and Elvira Nabiulina started losing bit by bit, and now she is on the losing side. Sergei Chemizov is a close friend, one of the very closest friends of Vladimir Putin. They served together in the Eastern Germany in the KGB. They lived together. Their doors faced, they were next to each other. You know, they celebrated different, events with their families together. That kind of close friends they are. And I take it that Sergei Chemizov, and he definitely would benefit from lower interest rate because he's running a mighty, powerful and industrial empire. So he definitely needs cheaper money, and he doesn't care much of what happens with inflation, really. None of his concern. So I take it that he had conversations with Vladimir Putin, and there was an event when Putin called Nabiulina directly right before the press conference where she would announce decision to raise the key interest rate above 21%. And then she was visually scared after that call on public, and she didn't raise it. She kept it. And then she started lowering the key interest rate. And now it's down to 18%. From 21, it went down to 20 and then to 18. Well, it means
You
one
wonder what
thing.
that phone call is like. I mean, I know they will never find the transcripts of this, but did he show her a picture of an
Yeah.
open window, or did he send her a cup of tea or something? Who knows how that goes.
I think that he just told her, and then she understands all those pictures about a cup of polonium tea or open window in her head. She knows. Okay, she doesn't have to be told. She understands very. She's a very smart woman. So she started softening the ground underneath her, and she's been talking publicly about that the Russian economy is not doing well. It's not central bank's fault. It's high expenses and things like that. She has been preparing her fall, so to speak. She spoke very openly and very harshly at St. Petersburg International Economic Forum about a month ago, saying that this is it. Russia has no reserves left, and now the only way is down. Okay, and she lowered the key interest rate, and it shows that she is forced to do that by a mightier group, political group that is fighting her. And it has nothing to do with the economy because the inflation is going up and it's increasing at the highest, probably highest speed since the start of the war. They just raised all the tariffs for the utilities in Russia by a great deal. And that's a huge driver for inflation historically. Every July they did it, we saw spikes of inflation. And, so the decision is political, not economical. So what it's going to do is, first of all, it's not going to help enterprises a great deal because, I mean, 21 is very high, 20 is very high, and 18 is almost as high. Okay,
It's not a
imagine
big
borrowing,
difference there.
yeah,
Yeah.
borrowing from a bank at, let's say, 27 or 23, something like that. That's a little less, but it's a lot. It's still a lot. So in order for any economy, for any industrial enterprises to function normally, you need a key interest rate from 5 to 7%, which is normal. Okay. Now 18, that's the key rate. The commercial banks, they issue loans at much higher, at a premium. So I would say now enterprises can borrow starting at 23%, 23, 24%, something like that.
You
So
have to have incredible profit margins in order to make that work for any business.
Elvira Nabiulina definitely is trying to save her butt. But it's not helping great deal the production, the industry. It's hurting a great deal inflation because we will see higher rate of inflation in Russia. There's no question about that.
And that's where people really start to feel it. They may not be against the war, they may not be for the war, but they can feel inflation eating into their own personal wealth and inconveniencing their lives. And this seems to be what Ukraine's strategy is now turning to as well. We saw 4 days of drones flying around Russian airports. The main four airports in Moscow were closed down. Tens of thousands of tourists couldn't take their flights, weren't getting reimbursed. The airports ran out of food and water. I mean, it's a horrible situation for families. I don't want to say that it isn't without, some inconvenience and horrors for people, but the Ukrainian strategy seems to be quite smart. Damage the economy to force inflation higher, to force costs on businesses, and inconvenience individuals, make them realize their country is engaged in a full-scale war, so they can no longer stick their heads in the sand and pretend it's not happening.
I certainly see that happening in Russia. Ukrainian strikes are intensifying. Russian airports, it seems like under constant alert, constant attack. Kazan suffers the most these days. There are two flights from Tashkent, no, from either from Moscow or from Tashkent, I don't remember, to Kazan. It's a morning flight and evening flight. In the morning flight, now you can basically buy tickets for nearly nothing because the strikes come in the morning for some reason, early morning. And the flights are 90% of early flights, the first half of the day, get canceled. And only flights that depart in the evening, they depart more or less on time. So that's what happens in Kazan. We are seeing a huge, I can't really say it's disaster, it's just chaos in Moscow,
Mhm.
in St. Petersburg. They just executed first attack on Sochi. There was a chaos in Sochi for quite some time, and that
Yes.
is unheard of.
They
Russian
destroyed
news
a fuel container, didn't they? I think near Sochi airport.
near Sochi airport. I've been to Sochi many times personally. I know where that fuel container, they call it the oil storage facility, Neftinaya Baza. Not too far from the airport. And Adler, that's part of Sochi where the airport is located, is a very small town, a big village basically. So everything is close, uh, you know, is packed. So it's the first time they execute the strike on Sochi, and if you look at Sochi, it's guarded by tall mountains from the attacks. Okay, and on one side it's the Black Sea, and it's not too far from Turkey. On the other side, it's tall mountains, and then that's another military operation executed by the Ukrainian forces because it's really difficult to get to Sochi. That's why Sochi airport's been open and flights, they haven't stopped since the start of the invasion. So Ukrainians are doing that, and it's working. Don't forget the attacks on railroad tracks in Rostov province, northern Rostov province. It's actually they go by the border of Ukraine, near the border of Ukraine. When you travel by train or by car from Rostov to Moscow, the major highways are almost right next to railroad tracks, and there is like 100-kilometer part of the road where you know too far away from Russian major cities, and there are no FM radio stations, but there are Ukrainian FM radio stations. You turn them on and you pick up the Ukrainian, programs. So that's what happens. Very northern part of Rostov province. So they destroyed some railroad tracks there, and for a couple of days, so it's havoc in you know the chaos in Crimea, in Rostov, in Sochi, and because people just the trains were delayed. Trains get never delayed. Okay, it's
Hmm.
just the planes, but this is the beginning of something new. So the strategy is
And yeah,
definitely working, and I can't really say that Russians. It's inconvenience for Russians. Huge. It's not of an inconvenience. It's for some people it's a big deal because not all people travel for leisure vacations to
mm,
Turkey. A lot of people travel on business, and it disturbs life a great deal. And you're absolutely right. It gives people food for thought. When they get upset, then they start asking questions. Why? Why is this happening? What is the reason? But what is the
mm.
ultimate reason? Well, perhaps they will start asking the right questions one day.
And one day, but they may not really want to get to that, even if they sort of subconsciously know the answer to it. That might be buried quite deeply, but it does have some interesting effects. So we've got the Russian railways. They're reporting some serious financial strain on the railway system. That traditionally has been quite sort of profitable area of the economy. It's something that a lot of people use to get around. You've got Russian steel makers reporting sharp drops in profit. You've got the coal industry, which is an absolute crisis. Um, we've got stronger rumors coming out now of banks that are going to go cap in hand to the government for bailouts. We've got the property industry that's up against the wall. We're really starting to see more of a systemic crisis starting to impact key sectors of the economy.
I'm following the situation in Russian economy closely, and I'm seeing all industries except for one, all of them. And I'm talking about civil industries, not the military industrial complex. All civil industries are in trouble or in crisis. Some are deeper and some are on the way there. The only industry that is doing very well, showing record profits, is the funeral business, funeral industry.
There was a guy
Um,
boasting, wasn't there, at the St. Petersburg Economic Forum about
yes, it was a good
how
time. He
well
was
he's.
having a good time.
Oh
Yes,
my
yes.
God.
This private party organized by Alpha Bank with loads of black caviar, with loads of expensive delicacies, and then him and his wife dancing, having a good time. And this is pretty much the mood of people in the funeral industry. That's how they're feeling. They're having a time of their lives.
It's you can't even make it up. It's a really, really sick joke, in fact. Uh,
Yes,
yeah. Yeah, I won't even go any further with that because I think the irony of that, the grotesqueness of that is
grotesque.
just
Yes,
extraordinary.
grotesque
It
is the
is
right word.
grotesque.
Grotesque.
It really is. And the last area I'm going to talk about, and again, this seems to me pretty grotesque, but also really kind of weird. We all remember the picture of the Russian woman in the car, leaving Crimea on the bridge because, well, there's a war on and she didn't like it and she was crying and complaining. But there's a major article in the Moscow Times about an industry that is kind of, but I'd say it's booming, but it's profitable. It's investing in a lot of advertising, and this is what do you call this? Holidays in hell. This is vacation resorts in occupied Ukrainian territory, such as Krylyvka. And this also strikes me as something extraordinarily grotesque. That not only have you got this business that's kind of thriving, you've got tens of thousands of people who will think, well, should we go over here and it'll cost like that much and maybe we can't afford it? Or why don't we go on holiday to a war zone and sit on a beach with missiles flying over, with drones going overhead? But hey, the beaches are quite clean as long as you don't go in the water because there's probably oil and contaminants. But hey, it's cheaper. Let's go there. What the hell is going on, Konstantin?
It's a very complicated topic. I have my take on it. I could be wrong, but this is what I think. First of all, a lot of Russians who go there, they have no clue that there's a war going on in Crimea. They have no clue that water is contaminated with, you know, oil, heating oil. Russian propaganda is doing fantastic job um, engineering their minds. Okay, they're not saying of any dangers that exist in Crimea. They're quite on the contrary. They're promoting Crimea. Crimea in the Russian propaganda and the Russian media is picture perfect paradise. You
Also,
know, part of
Mariupol.
Russia.
I mean, they're advertising holidays in Mariupol, which is wow.
Well,
I
that
mean,
is
that's just
simply sick.
extraordinary.
This
Yeah.
is sick. This is sick. I heard stories about the battle for Mariupol, and I heard stories of what was happening here. We have a family who fled, who lived in Mariupol, worked at Azovstal, a family of engineers. And once Mariupol was occupied by the Russians, they fled, and they were telling us stories. For goodness sake, their
Yeah.
sons, one of their sons is a teenager. I think he was like 12 or 13 years at the time. He got gray hair from what he was seeing leaving Mariupol. Okay. I just, as a human being, I don't understand anyone who chooses to vacation in Mariupol. This is simply sick. Okay. Crimea, you know what I also don't understand is that a lot of people choose to avoid, well, there are two routes leading from Russia to Crimea. One route is through the Crimea Bridge, through Krasnodarsky Krai, the
Hmm.
southern
There's the
route, and the northern
Kerch
route,
Strait, Kerch
right,
Bridge. Yeah.
Kerch Bridge. I call it the Crimea Bridge.
Mm.
And then another route, you make it to Rostov-on-Don, and you go, westwards. You go to Taganrog, to Mariupol, to Melitopol, and then you just go to Crimea. That's a faster route. You save a couple hours.
Mm.
That's a war zone.
Yeah.
It's a real war zone, and there are remnants of war on every single square meter of that route. You could see burnt cars. You could see military equipment. There are minefields not too far. And people in Russia choose to take that route to drive to Crimea with their, men take their families, wives and children, and drive. And then I saw pictures and videos as they drive. They film what's around them, and it's the remnants of cars burned down, and then most likely people were in those cars when they were burning. And again, I don't, Jonathan, I'm sorry, but I it's beyond my understanding.
It
Um,
is. It is curious.
so
I mean, I
going
have to
going
say, I mean, I went on a holiday to Israel when I was younger, and we also saw some burnt out tanks and stuff. But I feel that I feel that that's different. But
I think it's different. It's quite different, yeah. And then coming back to Crimea, going back to Crimea. On one hand, in one hand, they have this picture perfect in their heads, and that's built. That picture is painted by the propaganda. On the other hand, they face a dilemma this year. Their incomes are dropping. Fewer and fewer Russians can afford vacations overseas, and Turkey is the most common um, country where they fly to. Turkey is becoming less affordable to many Russians. And yet, Russians like to vacation in the summer because, Russia is a very cold country and they only get a couple months of nice weather. Therefore, what are the options? Fly to Sochi. Well, Sochi is even more expensive than Turkey these days because Sochi is very limited supply and demand is huge. And
And the
people,
service is probably not quite
Russians,
so
yeah.
good. And yeah,
Oh, but Russians are ripping Russians off. Okay, basically what they're doing, they're using this situation to enrich themselves. And then there's Crimea, and Crimea is pitched by propaganda as a perfect place to go on vacation. And they do. They choose to drive down there. There are no planes that fly to Crimea, obviously. There is a Crimea Bridge. That's one route, or you can take a train. Take it travels, I don't know, 36 hours from Rostov, from Moscow to Sevastopol. It's a very inconvenient long way, and it's become
that's
very
a long
expensive.
way.
It
Yeah.
costs more than the plane tickets before the start of the war, by the way. So that's why they go to Crimea, and there's another factor that I think that kind of helps Russians make that decision to go there. A lot of Russians deny the idea of the war. They think it's not the war; it's some insignificant event for them, happening far away in Ukraine, and it doesn't concern them, doesn't affect them, doesn't touch them in any way. Okay, they're living peaceful lives, normal lives. Everything is business as usual in their lives. Yes, there is special military operation happening in Ukraine. Yes, it's unfortunate, but it's not really. It's none of our business. Okay, we just want to live our life as usual, and then so they distance themselves from this war that is going on, this tragedy. Okay, and then they not pretend they live as normal life, and that also I think contributes to a lot of people making decision to go on vacation in Crimea. And it's just I have one picture in my head. 2 years ago, in the summer of 2020, I believe it was 2023, there was an attack of a missile was flying towards Sevastopol, and it was shot down. And that missile basically was shot down above one of the very populated beaches in Sevastopol city beach, and it rained basically remnants of the rocket all over the beach, killing a lot of Russians who were at that beach.
Mm.
Okay.
It was right near a sort of radar tracking station, which is where I think the missile was heading to hit a very significant piece of military infrastructure.
Yes, so they shot it down, and
Mm.
well, uh, and then people got killed, and most of them were out of towners vacationing. Okay, how can parents take their children to go to the same place where that happened 2 years ago? Also, please tell me, Jonathan. I don't get it. Okay, I'm
I
perhaps I'm a
yeah, I mean,
defective Russian, or but I don't get it.
I don't get it, but I've seen stuff like that. I mean, I think I mentioned it before. I got a, and this is slightly different because it's not a holiday, but I got a tour of a coal mine when I was up in the far north in Vorkuta. I went down Vorkutinske Schacht Nummer 1, um, 750 meters below ground. And the guy who was taking me, we bribed him with a bottle of Armenian cognac to take me down the mine. And the train, it's a little train. The train goes about sort of, I think it was about a kilometer and a half into the seam. And then you go take a lift and then you go down and down and down. Anyway, we passed a spot where just a few months before, something like 70 miners had been killed where the tunnel had caved in. And he just said to me, very matter of factly, "Oh, here we go. This is where it happened. We've patched it all up." And I'm like, "Are you not concerned about coming down here and working?" And he just sort of shrugged, it is what it is. And so I don't understand it, but I've seen plenty of examples of people just sort of, I know, carrying on and deciding not to think about that kind of thing.
Well,
Yeah.
I don't know what to
It,
say.
no, I mean, if people were more concerned for their own safety, then they may hold their leaders to more account. So I think it's something that has to get fixed. Well, before we sign out, I'd love to know, and I'd love to sort of advertise what you're planning to cover on your channel in the next days and weeks. What should our audience be looking out for in terms of the stories that you think are important that you'll be making videos on?
I make a review of Russian economy weekly. I make a review every Wednesday, and basically I track the progress of Russian economy. And obviously, it's a negative progress these days, you know. So I'm monitoring how it's becoming more and more negative. So if you want to know more about facts, numbers, figures, events happening in of Russian economy, then tune in every Wednesday to Inside Russia weekly economic update. Then every Friday, sometimes I do it on Saturday or Sunday. Tomorrow I'll be doing um, crazy news update. Russian crazy news. The news in Russia now, they're crazy. That's the best word I could come up with to describe them.
What you call this? You should have a brand for this, Sumashers Chas or something like that.
Well, I think this is the brand, crazy news, Russian crazy news. I think this is the brand. Okay, if you have any suggestions, let me know. Or if
Yes.
perhaps viewers have suggestions, let me know. Let us know in the comments. How to brand this.
Yeah.
The best I could come up with is Russia's crazy news update because they
Yeah.
are so crazy. The
The
latest
Kyiv
news.
Independent has one. The Kyiv Independent calls it "What the F is wrong with Russia?" So they've already got that copyrighted.
Okay, that's a good one too. Yes, yes, yes. Yeah, well, at first I started doing weekly updates, news updates, and I called it "Meanwhile in Russia,"
Yeah.
which is pretty self-explanatory. But then the news got so strange that that's so outrageous that I renamed it into "Crazy News Update." So, but yeah, it's very. I like that. What the f is going on with Russia? Yeah, and the news are unbelievable. I have a dozen or so news in tomorrow's update on Sunday. So please tune in to watch. It will be very interesting. Um, then I cover current events of what happens in Russia. I cover what Russian Z patriots and propaganda says. That's very important. That cannot be found in any Western news, in any mainstream news media. And I try to get more philosophical, trying to understand Russian people, why they're silent, why they think that they are powerless against the government. This is what we started um, this video with, talking about protests in Ukraine,
Yeah.
that type
Yeah.
of thing. Why they have built informational bubbles around them and they do not pay attention to what's going on outside their bubbles. And if someone tries to poke through, they shut them down immediately. Okay, this type of questions. Where are the roots of all Russia's problems today? Where are the roots of this war? Are they just a few years back, or perhaps the roots are in early 90s, or perhaps even further in history? That one or two live streams I usually live stream on my channel. I do about trying to understand these things about Russia. Things, by the way, I do not find them any discussed anywhere on the internet. That's why I think of them, and that's why I try to inform of my opinions and facts about Russia. So that's pretty much what I do on at Inside
I think
Russia.
it's super, super important because there are a few people talking about some of various things, but I don't think anyone can find the kind of detail that they can in yours. And some of the topics, as you say, are not covered at all because no matter how good most Western experts are, Many of them can't speak Russian, or at least can't speak it fluently enough to, get primary source material and to judge whether it's good or not. So a lot of it's just sort of secondhand recycled content. No matter how talented the journalists are, it just, lacks that, I think, authenticity. And
They
as you
have
say,
very
the
limited
ability to
sources.
very limited
Sources,
sources. Yeah,
yes, and
it's
dangerous sources because most of them uh, take what Russian government has to say. If they talk about the
yeah,
economy, they take official data coming from
yeah,
Rosstat, which is
yeah.
cooked, but they take it as if it was true. So things like that, and that's why this is what I try to inform the world about the truth that is happening
It
in Russia.
It's so important. I heard Michael Naki, he actually says it almost every episode. He says, today we're going to be talking about, and then like but this is of course in Russian, not English. And he'll talk about what's happening in the economy. And then he'll have a little joke and he'll say, and if you want to get this news in English, then 2 months' time you'll be able to hear it when they eventually catch up with reality. And
Mm.
unfortunately, it's true. And but if people want to know this sooner rather than later, you're a great conduit for the best information um, at the time it's happening, not with a 2 month delay. So
Jonathan,
strongly conjure.
before we finish, I would like to give you an example of what we just talked about. So remember, there were numerous reports in the Western media a year ago, year and a half ago. How Russian economy was going strong, was doing good. Russian economy was circumventing the sanctions and actually growing. Remember all those reports?
Mm, I thought they were crazy at the time, but yeah.
Have you heard of Have you heard of the story of a reporter from the Bloomberg who defected to
Ooh,
Russia?
right. I haven't followed it in detail. I kind of it's ringing
So
a bell, but I didn't.
there was a Russian guy working at some some financial institution or media institution. I think it was a reporter, and then in 2020 he moved to the West and he landed a job at the Bloomberg as economic analyst, and obviously his area expertise was Russia. And he was doing lots of reports, and he was doing reports after the start of the war, and then he was doing reports on the health of Russian economy, on the overall health, how it was not too bad, not too shabby,
Hmm.
growing despite all that. And then recently he quit his job and he disappeared. He reappeared in Moscow. He was hired on the spot by Sber. It's
What's he wants?
financial analysis division, and now he's reporter slash analysis there, and having a good time, enjoying the money he earned in Bloomberg, and he spread so many pieces of information about Russia, and now he's under protection. Back to alma mater, to the motherland, to the organization that sent him in the first place. So, and he's only one that people know of right now. How
Oh
many
wow.
others are working like him? So,
And this sounds like the classic profile of a kind of sleeper agent. Yeah, someone injecting really bad information into the Western media environment. Well, I'm going to look that up because I hadn't heard of that story. But
I plan on making a live stream about that
ah,
in one of those days next week, in the upcoming
yeah,
week.
send me the link and I'll have a good look at that, and then I'll uh, I'll get some Ukrainian journalist friends of mine to do a bit more digging and see what we can come up with. Well, that's a fascinating story, but unfortunately, yeah, it raises the question that you have: is how many more agents and assets are there injecting really bad analysis and information into the Western media, which is not brilliant, unfortunately, at covering either uh, truthful stories about Russia. And as the protests, just to loop back to what we originally started, I think the coverage of the protests in Kyiv in most Western media, including the British media, have been really, really bad. They just don't understand the mechanics behind it, and they probably haven't talked to enough Ukrainians to really get inside their heads. And we got to do better. If we're going to build resilient societies against disinformation and against Russian um, aggressive operations, we have to get a lot more resilient and a lot more knowledgeable and a lot more competent than we currently are. That's my moan for today.
You said an incredible phrase. You said they cover the events, but they don't understand the dynamics behind
Yeah,
the events. And this is what exactly, thank you so much. This fits perfectly the explanation of what I do. I explain the dynamics behind the processes that everyone sees on the surface. Okay, but the real events that are happening, they're happening behind the curtains, behind the closed doors, and then I try to explain that. So thank
that's
you.
why your stuff is so valuable, and strong encouragement to people to really tune in, because this is not either information or insight that you're going to get from mainstream media. Konstantin, thank you so much for coming back on and helping us to explore these topics once again. I personally think these are invaluable, and your insight is invaluable. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Jonathan. My pleasure.